Hello there, everyone on Twitch and YouTube and all the rest of it. Welcome to a special discussion with Jackson Hinkle. Hello there, Jackson.
How's it going?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Doing okay. I'm in Arizona right now and it's a bit chilly out, but it's nice to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So, for anyone who may not have heard of you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I normally live in Orange County, California. That's where I'm from. And I grew up as an environmental activist and just like a general leftist organizer.
Yeah.
I ran for city council when I was 18. I was still in high school in my hometown. And again, when I was 19, got super close, ran on a pretty leftist, socialistic platform in a very conservative town. And I've always been interested in national politics, so I started my own YouTube show called The Dive with Jackson Hinkle, kind of at the start of the pandemic. And since then, just been covering national politics. And recently, I've gotten very involved in the Force the Vote campaign. And I've actually been helping organize some direct action events in Washington, D.C. for January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th to try and pressure our progressive members of Congress to, take a House floor vote on Medicare for all.
Yeah. So, yeah, like you say, you're going to be one of the speakers at the event in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so I'm going to be speaking there, and basically it kind of came about. I was streaming probably, I think it was the day after Jimmy Dore had Justin Jackson on his show, the football player who kind of sparked this Force the Vote conversation online. And someone in my chat was like, oh, geez, this is just going to be another one of those things that remains like a Twitter hashtag, like when General Strike was trending on Twitter and everyone's like, okay, are you going to do anything about it? Are you going to reach out to union organizers? Are you going to try to make anything happen? Or are we just going to tweet about it? So someone mentioned that on stream, and I was like, we should do something. We should organize something in DC. We should make these Congress people actually feel like they're being held accountable rather than just talk about this vague concept of accountability. So, I was like, let's do it. I don't really have a huge following or anything. So I'm glad there's been a lot of leftists, leading leftist voices that have been interested in this and down to help make this happen. Brianna Joy Gray, Nick Brana, they're both going to be on board and speaking at the event as well.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's quite exciting then, really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going well.
Yeah. So, as I talked about to you off it, I have a fair amount of skepticism, I think, about tactics. But for everyone watching and for Jackson themselves, this isn't a matter of trying to deny anyone healthcare. Certainly not from my perspective. I think the fact that Americans don't have healthcare is an abomination, especially given that it's the richest country the world has ever known, and that's really, really shocking. But I do have some misgivings about the tactic involved. But for anyone who's been living in a cave, perhaps, why don't you explain what the Force the Vote campaign is about?
Yeah, so and I want to preface the conversation with the fact that I definitely think there can be strategic disagreements, and I think there should be a debate on this. I think that's totally fine. But anyways, the premise behind Force the Vote is the fact that Nancy Pelosi has really given the progressive wing of the Democratic Party nothing. There have been no bones given to us over the past 2 years. Even when we had a pretty strong progressive caucus, it was growing. We have the Squad. We have even people who don't align with the Squad all the time, but are pretty close to them on policy and definitely support Medicare for all, right? Yeah. And Nancy Pelosi has given us nothing over the past 2 years. And beyond that, she has belittled the progressive wing of the Democratic Party time and time again, and really made us all look like a joke. So the idea behind Force the Vote is, on January 3rd, there's going to be the upcoming House speakership elections for these next 2 years. Nancy Pelosi is expected to be elected speaker again, which is kind of crazy because even in 2018, when there was a much smaller caucus of progressive members in the House, there was talks of Barbara Lee running for speaker back then. So the fact that it's kind of already a done deal and there's no one challenging Nancy Pelosi, in my eyes, that's ridiculous on its own. But Nancy Pelosi is expected to win the speakership election. She is really receiving no criticism or challenger. And unfortunately, we did lose Democratic seats in the House this year under her leadership. It was primarily people who didn't support progressive policies that lost their House seats to Republicans. And because of that, because of the fact that we did lose seats, the speakership vote is going to be much closer than it was back in 2018. So the idea behind this is, well, look, this vote's already going to be close. Why not band together, say, 8 of the 16 to 20 progressive members in the House that really are true hard fighters of Medicare for all, and try to leverage your collective power, withhold your vote for Nancy Pelosi as speaker, and demand something in return, demand multiple things in return of giving her your vote for Speaker of the House, because this is Nancy Pelosi's last term. You know, she's had a very long career and she wants to go out on top. She wants her legacy, her very last term to be Speaker of the House. She wants that more than anything else. That's all she cares about right now. So why not withhold the number one thing that she cares about right now to try and not even leverage passing Medicare for all, but just taking a House floor vote on it? We're not asking for much. And I think this very well could be the first big step and it's really a low hanging fruit, but it really would be the first big step in this, what is going to be a longer fight to actually passing Medicare for all. So it's doable, it's achievable. And if the progressive members of caucus have a spine, I think that they would do this. They would have the courage of their convictions and force a vote on Medicare for all.
Yeah, I think you've laid that out pretty damn well. But the first problem I have is the point you touched on, the idea of leveraging for many things that power. I'm not one of the people who would deny that it's very, very possible, especially in a, as you mentioned, much reduced Democratic majority, which is, it's razor thin. It's down to, is it 4 or 5 votes? So you really wouldn't take much. So it could definitely be done. But are there potentially more immediately pressing concerns, given the fact that $600, the kind of highlight amount that's being talked about in terms of relief money is farcical? Possibly trying to do something around that might be more immediately politically efficacious. Possibly. Ultimately, as you mentioned, this bill is not just unlikely, but is virtually impossible to pass on this occasion. So it seems... Whether I'm not suggesting you at all, but whether some people are doing this for entirely performative reasons or otherwise, does it not seem like it might be bad optics at the very least to be seen to leverage your power for something you know already is going to lose?
I think right now Medicare for all is the biggest. I'd say it's up there for the biggest issue that the working class and the most vulnerable populations in our country currently face. And it's really the vast majority of Americans that are suffering at the hands of not having Medicare for all. There's 105 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured at the moment. 68,000 preventable deaths happen every year because we don't have basic health insurance here. It's ridiculous, and it's a uniquely American problem. So, even in this pandemic, 15 million people have lost health insurance because for some reason we tie health insurance to jobs here. So I personally think that it's so ridiculous that we are not even given the opportunity to have a vote on this. So fighting for this should be the number one cause right now. I think climate change and ending the imperialist wars are right up there with Medicare for all in terms of the seriousness of this issue. That being said, I do agree, like, there are other fights to be had, and progressives should frankly be leveraging their power to do all of that and to fight for all of these policies. But, you do have to pick your battles. I will say that there's a general sentiment amongst people who do agree with the forced to vote movement and who are going to be in DC for this series of protests, that we should be pushing for other things, such as the contract with Black America. You know, that was Ice Cube's like package that he put forward for uplifting the lives of Black Americans. And I think that's very important. And there's the potential to get members of at least the Black Caucus on board there and potentially have them withhold their support from Nancy Pelosi. And then the stimulus check is also a big thing, you know, but as much as I agree with those, and I think, you know, if the opportunity, I guess, shows itself at the protest, then we should be making those calls and demands. But you don't want to muddy the waters too much when you already have a complex and difficult fight like this on Medicare for all. So that's going to be our main focus. And I will say that every single major piece of legislation that has passed in American political history has been met with you know, great opposition from the ruling elite. You know, New Deal, Voting Rights Act, 19th Amendment, you name it. They've all been met with great opposition. And people at the time, before they were passed, would say, you know, that you're crazy for thinking you're going to pass the 19th Amendment or abolishing slavery or whatever. But it does happen if you push hard enough. And I think with the general attitude of the vast majority of Americans on this issue who do support Medicare for all and think it's ridiculous that we don't have it, I do think it's possible that within the next 2-3 years we pass Medicare for all, and we can get into that as to why I think that. But I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think it's a slightly different scenario to talk about, say, for instance, the Voting Rights Act or slavery as examples of great change that was done in that way, because you had, in the case of slavery, obviously the American Civil War, and in the case of the Voting Rights Act, the social changes from women in the workplace during the First World War, as huge social pressures in place that forced that kind of change through. It forced the situation upon a ruling class who didn't want to do it, that I don't see on this occasion, because whether we like it or not, and I absolutely despise it, 150 million people just voted for 2 presidential candidates, both of whom oppose Medicare for all. So even though it has significant public support, it's clearly not a deal breaker to the point that will force the hand of the establishment to do a thing that progressives want it to do at this time, and that it needs to be more. It seems to me you're putting the cart before the horse on this occasion and expecting Congress to do a thing without having done necessarily the groundwork first. And I'm not trying to shit on any American people out there in the field doing the real hard graft, but it seems to me that things like the fact that Democrats and progressives more specifically hold such little power in state legislatures, for instance, is a huge drawback to that, to the point where you've got, I mean, a pretty damned right-wing Congress. It doesn't seem to me likely that that's going to pass in the next 2 to 3 years, especially given that midterms generally go against the party who the president holds, so it could be that you even lose the House to the Republicans in 2 years' time.
Yeah, well, I think that this pandemic and this healthcare crisis that we're currently facing in the country is comparable to the events that have led to passing major legislation in American history. It's like, I mean, so everyone who's alive today pretty much has never gone through something like this pandemic, right? Yeah. Again, 15 million people have lost their health insurance. These are people who before the pandemic were, in many cases, working well-off salaried jobs. They weren't even, wage slavery workers. They were well off, and now they're recognizing that the system is an utter failure, and it does not protect our most vulnerable people. So I do think that the political climate today is ripe for this sort of change and revolutionary, groundswell that could take place right now. And I think it kind of is taking place. We're seeing the starts of it right now. But like I said, with the 19th Amendment, and this is just one example, but when Jeanette Rankin was first sworn into Congress, she was the first woman who was made it into Congress, and she was a national organizer for women's suffrage. And she started a House floor open debate on women's suffrage in 1918 or 1919, like right after she was sworn into Congress. Everyone's like, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your political capital. Everyone in here is a dude. They're not going to support this. They don't want women to have the right to vote. But when enough political pressure is exerted on the ruling elite, they will cave, because what they want at the end of the day is to maintain their respective seats in Congress, in the House, or in the Senate. And I think the same could be said about what this fight for Medicare for all is shaping up to be. You have 49% of Republicans that support Medicare for all because this policy makes sense. It's going to save lives, save money. It's going to make this country a better place. And if Republicans feel as though they might be losing their seats because of a groundswell of support for Medicare for all, they don't care. They'll have plenty of contributions coming into their next reelection bid from, the fossil fuel industry, from the military industrial complex, from Wall Street and the banking industry. They don't have to worry about, one sector or losing one sector's support. So I do think that the potential to make this happen, if there's enough support on the ground, or at least pass something. Maybe we don't get everything within 2 years, but I would be shocked if we do have this groundswell of support coming out of this pandemic and we don't score some political victories surrounding healthcare coverage in the United States. So I do think this could be a changing moment in our country's history.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt it could be a change in American history, and I certainly hope it is. And I think the reason that I find it difficult to become too sort of confrontational about this is because I think the majority of the people who are doing this are incredibly well-intentioned, and ultimately any pressure put on the establishment to try and enact progressive change, I think is generally a positive thing. Keeping, at the very least, it keeps the public discussion focused on something positive rather than some horrific GOP bullshit about, I don't know, immigrants or whatever. So that's generally a positive thing. But there is, of course, the practicality issue. Which is the main sort of bugbear that I have with this plan, is that you're going into it knowing it's going to fail, and I think you would concede that point, that the vote won't win. But what happens if, for instance, Nancy Pelosi either tries to call the bluff of these group of congresspeople, or does cut some sort of backroom deal with 10, 20, whatever, more moderate GOP members to get through? You either then have a Pelosi beholden to certain GOP interests, which I would argue she sort of is already, but also you have the potential for Kevin McCarthy, the GOP nominee for the position, to win because it's a majority of the votes cast. So with a razor-thin majority for the Democrats, it wouldn't take many to abstain on the Democratic side for the potential for Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker. And then you would have the GOP controlling the legislation that would be voted on in both houses of Congress, which would be a disaster for progressives, surely.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. I knowing how the Democratic Party operates, they are essentially another Republican Party, right? They're just like a little bit more socially liberal than the Republicans. But knowing the structure of the Democratic Party and how these staffers and donors and donor systems work, that's more impossible. That's less likely to happen than actually, passing Medicare for all through the House in my eyes. But that's the thing. It's like exactly what you said. It would take majority to establish a speaker. And that's why it's so unlikely that Kevin McCarthy would ever become speaker. But I guarantee you, if Nancy Pelosi tried something like that, it would ruin her political legacy, which, again, that's the main thing that she cares about in this scenario. B, it would cause every single major Democratic donor to jump ship, because even though they do generally care about progressive policy or they don't care about progressive policies. They do care about the facade of, maintaining a democratic sort of party that cares for the working class in this country. And that would have even larger ramifications than passing Medicare for all. So I think that's extremely unlikely and should be less of a concern than anything that we're currently fighting for.
I do have to somewhat push back on the idea of the Democratic Party being the same or very similar to the Republican Party. I think that's certainly the case with the corporate Democrats, but if progressives have a longer term strategy in America, surely it has to be to essentially infiltrate and take over the Democratic Party in the way that, say, the Tea Party did with the GOP. And so alienating yourself whilst you're in a weaker position, which the progressives are. I mean, they're a relatively small amount of the federal elected officials, right? Doesn't help that long-term strategy, and that's ultimately how progressivism will be enacted through the usual means. There are obviously, let's say, for terms of service purposes, more robust action that could take place that would bring progressive change into being. But if we're going to do it through legislation, it would have to be through co-opting the Democratic Party and its structures and taking it over, right?
I do want to address the first thing that you said. It's like if these people that are identifying themselves as progressives are not being progressive and not fighting for the policies that they care about, then how progressive are they? I think that's the first question that has to be asked. The second part I want to touch on is regarding the long-term strategy, which is by itself a failing strategy. If you recognize that healthcare is a human right, if you recognize the crisis that we're in, 68,000 people dying every year due to a lack of basic health insurance in this country, that boils down to about 168 people per day, which is probably about like 9/11 a month, worth of people that are dying, preventable deaths. That could be stopped if someone had a spine and actually fought to pass Medicare for all. So the long-term strategy of progressives is a failing strategy, and it's a strategy that says we're okay with 68,000 people dying every year as we wait and try to accumulate enough political capital and power to leverage that to fight for progressive policies. But let's hope that in the process of them accumulating that power, that they didn't, concede on their core values and their core beliefs to gain that power. Because that's what we've seen throughout modern political history in this country, is people who come into office with these very rosy ambitions and this belief that they can change the system. But the system eats away at those beliefs and those core convictions, right? Nancy Pelosi famously used to support Medicare for all. Barack Obama supported Medicare for all, or I should say they said they did. But at the end of the day, Washington brain got to them and they no longer had those core convictions by the time that they had accumulated enough political power to actually leverage power to make a difference in this country. So on top of it being a losing strategy because it's just going to cause an extreme amount of preventable deaths over the years, there's also the potential that it could just fail because these people will have to concede to get more power.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. But then that surely undermines one of the core arguments in favour of the force the vote plan. Because the plan is, like it's the vote, if it came to pass, wouldn't pass, and if it did, it wouldn't be brought to the vote in the Senate because Mitch McConnell's a prick. But regardless of that, your point is you'll know who would vote against it and primary them come election time next time around, which makes a certain amount of partisan sense, of course. But if your argument is that there's progressives are getting into those positions, being undermined by Washington brain and all the rest of it inside the Beltway, what's the point of even primarying anyone? Surely that's a kind of existential dread about the democratic process, and therefore what's the point in having any movement to try and change it, because it can't possibly change that way?
Yeah, well, two things there. I think like getting an actual vote on this and the potential for the American public finding out who really does support this and who doesn't support this bill. It's an acceleration strategy, right? We are accelerating I guess the findings of who actually supports Medicare for all. So that's going to allow us to primary these people much quicker than if we had to wait 10, 20 years for progressives to control the speakership position and call for a vote, right? And then we wait all that time, and then we finally find out that, oh my God, Kamala Harris actually doesn't support Medicare for all. I mean, that's an extreme example. I think most of us know she doesn't actually support it. Push came to shove. Yeah. She was like a tying vote. But yeah, so that's the first part of it. And then sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the second thing you said again? The last part of
yeah, well, I was suggesting that your argument that the progressives get co-opted by the kind of system surely undermines the point of trying to primary anybody. Yeah.
So then to that part, I mean, yeah, that is a serious concern. But the other part of that is there's always going to be new litmus tests, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be new litmus tests. So I talk about this with my community a lot. It's like the litmus test used to be, do you accept corporate PAC money or do you not? And then slowly but surely people realize that, like, okay, well, that doesn't really mean a whole lot, because you can take dark money, super PACs, and no one would really know. And then the next litmus test was like, okay, well, since we don't really know whether accepting corporate PAC money makes a difference, and there's also new avenues opening up for even Republicans to become incredible grassroots donors. We've seen that with Trump's own campaign. The next litmus test was kind of like, do you support progressive policies? Do you support Medicare for all? Do you support aggressive action on climate change? Some people see that as being the Green New Deal. Do you support those policies? And now there's kind of a new litmus test forming, and that's, okay, make sure that you got those first two litmus tests approved and you pass on those. Are you actually going to fight for the progressive policies that you say you care about? So that's why I'm so excited to kind of see this new wave of leftist candidates running for office across the country, many of whom are speaking out in support of the Force the Vote effort and saying that, if they're elected, they will aggressively push and do whatever they can do to force the vote on Medicare for all. Christine Oliva is a perfect example of that. She's running out of Miami, and she is criticizing the squad and progressive members of Congress on her Twitter right now, talking about the need to force the vote. Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, who were just elected, they went out on CNN when everyone else in the squad was silent and said, if Nancy Pelosi wants our vote, she better think about conceding on a few things before she asks for it. So we don't have, I guess, a clear promise from them that they're going to try to force the vote, but they were willing to go out on national media and talk about it. So there's always going to be new litmus tests and the potential to, I guess, create new forms of accountability for these people who are running for office and getting elected. And that's going to be a learning process for all of us moving forward. But I do think that this is a strategy of acceleration. And I also do think that this has the potential to skyrocket the popularity of the bill and potentially cause the American public to put enough pressure on our electeds, both left and right, to actually get this passed.
Well, I would hope that would be the case, but I mean, as I've said, 150 million people in America voted for two candidates who opposed it. So at the moment, that's not in place, regardless of whether people say in theory they support a thing, as with the representatives themselves. It's ultimately, when it comes down to it, would they actually vote for it? I'm not sure right now. I think a lot more grassroots work needs to be done. And I'm not suggesting that that's not being done, but I'm just saying it hasn't been done to this point. Now, in terms of the targets mentioned there, or not targets, the wrong word because it sounds quite violent, but in terms of putting pressure on people like, say, the squad, are you potentially aiming in the wrong direction there? Because we surely already know that there's a very significant portion of the Democratic Party and basically all of the Republican Party who currently oppose Medicare for all, or even a public option or something like that. Would it not be more more useful to try and use your time and political capital trying to primary those people out of their positions, because you already know that they don't support it and that they would vote against it? And surely building up the progressive caucus within the Democratic Party would be a much better long-term strategy in terms of trying to win the support necessary to actually get the bill passed, rather than do the thing which, like I say, is kind of performative in a sense, because it's not, you know, it's not going to pass on this occasion. Why not try and put the work in to get the more kind of blue dog dickheads out of power and replace them with genuinely progressive people, and then the bill would actually have a chance of passing potentially in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know who those people are, and there are people who are working on the ground to get those people out of office. There's too many to count. You know, with those people alone, we already have an uphill battle. Hence why I don't really believe that the long-term strategy is a strategy that should be prioritized in this battle. I honestly think, and I think many people who support force the vote believe this as well, that the acceleration strategy of trying to get anti-Medicare for all Congress people out of office is definitely important, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the top focus right now. Again, we have a political climate in this country that is unlike anything we've ever had in modern American history. We're coming out of we're still really neck deep in this pandemic, but soon, hopefully, we'll be coming out of it. And people recognize the failures of the system. And like every single, tying this back to the beginning of the conversation now, like every single major piece of legislation that has been passed in this country's history, it really, I mean, you could say these have all been like long-term strategies, long-term efforts to get these major pieces of legislation passed. New Deal, 19th Amendment, Civil Rights Act, any number of them that you list. But we have had that fight too with Medicare for all, and we've been, grabbing at that low-hanging fruit. We've expanded the Progressive Caucus. We've gotten the majority of Americans on board, much in part due to organizers like NNU and the Bernie Sanders campaign, who really made the national case for this and convinced the majority of Americans to support it. So I do think this has been a long battle and long strategy already. And now's the time. Now really is the time, given what this country and the globe is going through right now, to try and pressure politicians to make this happen. I think if anyone honestly believes that, there isn't a small chance somehow that this could pass, you're either a disingenuous actor and you're saying you're just, not cognizant of the history of this country and how policy that has uplifted the most vulnerable populations in the past has actually been enshrined into law. And it's been thanks to grassroots activists and people who are frankly pissed off that make up this country. It's not because a certain group of politicians decided, okay, now seems like a good time to pass the 19th Amendment, right? At the time that each of these respective policies have passed, you had people in Congress saying it was impossible to pass them. So it seems crazy and delusional to think that Medicare for all could pass, but all you have to do is look at how policies have passed in the past. And I will also add that there's the potential for a state waiver system to take place out of this. Like passing Medicare for all nationally might not be the easiest thing in the world compared to, say, doing a state-by-state waiver system, which is how Canada got their universal healthcare system. They passed a version of single payer in Saskatchewan, thanks to NDP organizers on the ground. And then slowly but surely, there were other provinces that decided that they were going to fight for a universal healthcare system in their respective provinces. And then slowly but surely, there was enough national pressure and enough support nationally for it that they were able to push for it nationally. So Yeah, I mean, I do think this is the time. This is the best opportunity we've ever had, and probably the best opportunity we'll have for decades to come to actually get this voted on, let alone passed.
Well, actually, it was a note I'd made. The Canadian example that you gave, I think, actually backs up the point that I made earlier about putting the cart before the horse. That really you should be focused more on trying to win power in state legislatures, and then enacting positive healthcare reforms in those localities, which act as a
Yeah.
beacon to neighbouring states. For instance, when people hear, "Oh, actually, in this state over, they've got this healthcare system, and they're not going bankrupt," type thing, you know.
Yeah, so I will add that that's been a part of this long-term strategy as well before I even got involved.
Yeah.
California famously, in New York as well, have tried to pass their own respective Medicare for all state waiver programs, which have both failed thanks to corporate politicians, and I also think due to the fact that maybe there just weren't enough people on the ground who were pressuring those politicians to pass this, right? It was close in California, but we didn't get it. So I think, again, now is a time like no other to make this happen. And maybe we go into the, the debate stage with this argument that we're trying to pass or trying to get a House floor vote on Medicare for all. And maybe they say no. But they might say, you know what, we're willing to look into doing a state by state waiver program, which undoubtedly is better than what we have right now. So I'm going, and I think most people are going into this balls to the wall, and they're trying to fight for those 68,000 people that die every year because they don't have health insurance. But if we get a state by state waiver program, that's better than what we have right now, and obviously gives us a far better path to actually achieving Medicare for all in the future if we do that. But the thing is, if we go into this battle asking for a state waiver program, guaranteed we will not get that, and they will try to negotiate us down from there to something else like a public option, which is I don't think anyone really wants that. That's another failing system and idea to implement in this country that actually might hinder the popularity of the Medicare for all or of a universal healthcare system. So I say, why not? Why not push for the most popular policy on this issue that we could fight for? As 72% support, according to even Fox News polls. So I think if we go into the fight for this, and we come out with something a little bit less than ideal, then that's better than going in for a state waiver program and coming out with a public option.
Yeah. But you mentioned the potential for other options, because of course Medicare for all isn't the only possible solution to getting universal healthcare. There are many systems across the world. I think one big stumbling block, and I mean I personally despise private healthcare and would never use it. I think it's an abomination. I think, as you point out, it's a human right. The private sector has no fucking business in that area. But unfortunately, that's not a universally held position, and a lot of people in America are very scared by the concept of getting rid of private healthcare. And if you had some sort of system, some sort of adapted M4A, which allowed people, if they wanted to, for whatever reason, to bankrupt themselves on private healthcare, because people don't always vote in their best interests, of course, I think that might have more chance of passing, because at least the very nature of you might even be able to get some Republican representatives on side on the basis that the private healthcare system would still be an option, if that makes sense. Would that be a better path forward than bludgeoning forward with a bill that won't pass? And again, I don't want to harken on that point, but I don't think it would.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And I understand your points regarding like a public option or something that's a little bit less fully fleshed out than complete coverage for everyone. But the problem with a public option is that if you do have a public option, it's going to be underfunded. It's not going to cover everyone. And what's going to happen is the healthcare companies, all the biggest ones in the country, Blue Cross Blue Shield, American Healthcare, what they're going to do is they are going to pawn off the sickest of the sick people to the public option and cause the public option system to essentially implode, because it's going to be underfunded and because it's going to not be able to provide quality care for people. It's going to have problems, and that will actually diminish the popularity of a Medicare for all style system if people see that system imploding and think, gee, this everyone knows that this healthcare system, if you have a tiered healthcare system, the public one is probably going to get the shit on the most by the private health insurance industries. That would be terrible if we had that for everyone in this country, right? You can see that with what's happened in numerous Latin American countries where they have tiered healthcare systems for indigenous people, and then working class people, and then the country's elite, and how the general sentiment towards each respective tier is different. So I think passing a public option could be one of the most destructive things to Medicare for all that could ever happen. And I'll add that if taking a vote on Medicare for all was a bad thing, if taking a vote on Medicare for all on the House floor was going to diminish the popularity of the bill, I think that Nancy Pelosi would have already done it. But I think she knows, and I think Chuck Schumer knows, that taking a vote and establishing a legitimate, serious national debate about this policy could very well take the popularity of the policy from 72% to 92%, because people are going to wake up and realize that it's a popular thing.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to try not to be rude here, but I think the point you made there about Nancy Pelosi is a little silly. Because frankly, the reason she wouldn't want to have this vote is not because she doesn't. I don't think she does support M4A, but I don't think she's doing it because it would be popular. It's because she doesn't want to lose a vote in the Congress, because that looks bad for her as the Speaker of the Congress, really. In the same way that she didn't want to hold the impeachment vote until she knew she had the votes in the bag. It's just basic politicking, isn't it?
But she doesn't support Medicare for all. She would be voting against it.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So she knows. Yeah. So she would be bringing a vote to the floor that.
In her eyes, she'd be winning if it failed.
Well, she would be winning, but it would be the Democrats have lost. Would be the point, wouldn't it? That's how it would be spun. She would be voting against it. Sure.
I think it would be the progressives would lose, which are the people that she hates the most, and wants the American people to think are failures, and wants the American people to hate the most. So,
well, why would you want the progressives to lose?
Why would you want them to lose?
No, why would you? You're saying that the progressives would lose, so you're setting the progressives up to lose, which seems silly.
I think in Nancy Pelosi's eyes, that's what she would think. But I think the vast majority of Americans would see the situation otherwise. I think the vast majority of Americans would appreciate the fact that they're fighting for us. But I think Nancy Pelosi doesn't understand the fact that so many Americans support this policy and are desperately in need of Medicare for all right now. And I think she's very out of touch. And I think she believes that if this were taken up for a vote, and it did fail miserably, she's probably going to be thinking like, well, the American people just saw that miserably fail. They're probably not going to be interested in continuing this debate or this fight further into the future. But there's the potential that it doesn't miserably fail and that there's a close vote, which probably scares her more than just about anything else. And there's the other side of it that I would imagine, is not seeing, in the fact that people do want to continue this fight regardless of whether we have success the first time or not. I think most people recognize that, okay, if we lose it the first time, then we'll get up and fight again in 2 years. We'll get up and fight again in the next 2 years, So I think she's just a bit out of touch.
Oh, there's no doubt she's out of touch. And I think a new generation, a clean sweep needs to come in and refresh the Democratic party leadership, because you've got old Biden and old Schumer and old fucking Pelosi. Look, a new generation needs to happen. The boomers need to fuck off. But anyway, regardless of that, to get back to the point, I don't think there would be even a close vote, because we all know that there's, say, every single GOP member is going to vote against it, of course. And we already know there are lots of blue dog people and corporatists who would vote against, and probably a number that would abstain as well. So I can't even see it being a narrow vote. It would, frankly, I think it would be humiliating for the progressive cause, and I think a lot of people would become disillusioned by it rather than emboldened in the way that you perceive it them to be. I think you're giving the American people too much credit, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to shit on people, but I think they would become disillusioned, and it might actually be counterproductive in the long term, or at least in the medium term.
Well, I'll take an example from this week, right? There was an effort to pass a $2,000 stimulus check to the American people. The vast majority of the American people support it. They didn't want that $600 check. They wanted a $2,000 check, but it failed, thanks in large part due to the Democrats in the Senate who made a disgusting action this morning by helping the Republicans, delay proceedings on the NDAA vote. And are Americans still not pissed off? Are they still not calling on their politicians to pass a $2,000 check? Are they still not supporting the bipartisan group of politicians, Bernie, Josh Hawley, and many others who are still fighting and still trying to delay proceedings on that NDAA piece of legislation? Of course not. They're still pissed off. They're still fighting. And I think to say that just because something fails the first time, that the American people are going to be silent and not speak out against it is absolutely insane. And I think you can look at even at the Georgia Senate elections, right? Because Kelly Loeffler and Perdue, I should say, David Perdue, they both decided that they were going to support the $2,000 stimulus checks because it's politically convenient. And they could have been silent. They could have abstained from any discussion. They probably knew that it was going to fail and that it wasn't going to pass. But they recognized that the voters in their district would have been very pissed off, or I should say in their state, would have been very pissed off had they not supported the $2,000 checks.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah, I don't think the American people would be silent by it. I mean, they would be disillusioned by it. They'd be angry to the point where they probably would feel less inclined to vote in the upcoming say midterm elections, and then they might ultimately lose the House, which, I mean, you can argue from maybe an accelerationist point of view that would be good, but I think that would be I don't think having both houses of Congress controlled by the GOP is a helpful way forward for getting any healthcare enacted.
I'm not sure I follow what you're saying, but like what I just pointed out with the check argument is that if Perdue and Loeffler, if it came down to it in a vote, I think they would have voted for the $2,000 checks, and they would have done that because they do have an election in front of them, and their constituents, the voters of Georgia, would have probably voted them out of office. Sorry, I don't know if you heard that. There's a dog outside. They probably would have voted them out of office, or it would have been a closer election had they not supported the $2,000 check. So that's a perfect example of just how important these votes can be in swaying public opinion.
Yeah, in the midst of an election campaign. But I'm saying going forward, say the midterms on until 2022. What I don't think you want to have happen is to disillusion the progressive part of the Democratic voting base by marching them up the hill to force this vote, and then it ultimately collapses down and loses quite badly in the Congress, which I think what would happen if it were brought to pass. And so ultimately what you would end up doing is essentially, for no immediate step forward, giving up potentially the Congress, the House, to the GOP in the midterms, which may happen anyway, I don't know. Although Trump could definitely play a wild card in that. And then having both houses of Congress controlled by the GOP is the exact opposite result that would ever get any kind of positive healthcare reform passed. So in the short term, that would definitely mean that there was no chance that this bill would pass in the next 2 to 3 years, which was the plan that you outlined earlier.
Well, I think all you have to do is look at what's happened over the past decade, right? Obama came into office, promised Medicare for all, said that he was going to fight for healthcare for everyone as a human right. He didn't. He didn't even fight for a public option. He went with the Romney Care plan of the ACA and worked to get that passed, right? He really didn't put up a fight for a public option, even though some people in the neoliberal circles would argue otherwise. But what happened then? did Obama's base of supporters say, oh my God, our guy who's supposed to be our Lord and Savior backstabbed us and didn't pass Medicare for all like he promised? No. If anything, public approval for universal healthcare has skyrocketed since then, right? So many people have seen the failures of the current system and have been pissed off by that, and are even more supportive of universal healthcare than ever before. So what I think would undoubtedly happen is if members of Congress vote no on Medicare for all after there's a national debate on it, after there's potentially House testimonies on why this should be passed. And, there's experts from across the globe who are brought in as to how this would help people. And the American people are given the opportunity to listen to that. And then members of Congress vote against supporting Medicare for all. That's going to cause a massive momentum change in this country. And the same thing that happened back in the elections in November would happen in a much larger scale across the country, right? What happened back then was every single member of Congress who's a Democrat who lost their respective elections in the midterms, I should say in the House, didn't support Medicare for all. And there was only one member of the House that was a Democrat that supported the Green New Deal who lost his respective election. So the American people don't forget about these things. It's not just that 2 years passes or 8 years passes in this case, or I guess it would be 10 years, and they forget about what's going on in their life. I think people look at their material well-being and take that to the polls, and that's what we saw play out in the midterm elections, right? Everyone who is still not getting health care, everyone who had a congressperson or a representative that said that the ACA is a good thing and that we shouldn't be fighting for Medicare for all, looked at that member of Congress and said, screw you, I'm going to vote for the Republican because you're not serving me, and that's my only other option. So I do push back on the idea that the American people would just be disillusioned or forget about what happened or something like that and not fight for something better or an alternative to what they're being given.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I don't think they would forget about it for a second. I think they would be disillusioned and angry, and I think they'd be right to be. It'd be a bad thing. But this brings me, the point you made there brings me back to the point I made earlier about we already know the significant numbers of Democratic members of the House and Senate, and indeed the president, the president-elect, who oppose Medicare for all. Mm-hmm. Before even bringing it to a vote, they've said so in their elections that have just passed or were passed a few years ago. So why target your metaphorical guns on people like AOC? In the way that I think, unfortunately, I'm not arguing that you have, because I don't know that to be the case, but people within the Force the Vote movement have been incredibly aggressive, at least verbally. I'm not suggesting any crime, but very aggressive in terms of going after people like the Squad, when at least on paper they support this, whereas we know there are lots of Democrats that don't support this. So why not go after those people when you already know, without having to waste time on a vote that won't go anywhere? Why not primary those people and try and get rid of those people and increase the number of progressive representatives, which would then make it at least plausible to pass a bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think this debate will go in circles, but I kind of bring it back to the beginning. There are people who are doing that. There's organizations dedicated to unseating anti-Medicare for all, anti-progressive members of Congress. So power to those people that are making that happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what good is it to get those members of Congress elected in the House or in the Senate, for that matter, if we manage to make that happen in the coming years, if they are not going to do what they campaigned on? And frankly, what they campaigned on, all you have to do is watch AOC's viral 2018 campaign video that really helped lead her to her insurgent victory, which the messaging was, we can't wait 10 more years. We can't wait 20 more years. We can't wait until people accrue political capital and pass Medicare for all. We have to be willing to fight for this now. If you elect me, I will do that. So really, this is a matter of them doing what they ran on, what their messaging was. If they're going to get in there and just be another cog in the machine for another 20 years, that's not helping anyone at all. So I think the idea behind force the vote is a very, very, very simple baseline argument of, you ran on this messaging. You promised us that you were anti-corporate, that you supported Medicare for all, that you were going to fight for it the moment you got into office. Well, here's your shining opportunity. We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are dying. People are suffering. And you, with 7 other members of your progressive caucus, have the power to get a House floor vote on Medicare for all. And I mean, it really is as simple as that. I don't think that they are wasting political capital by doing this. I don't think it's going to diminish the popularity of the bill or of progressive members of Congress by doing this. I think this is a net positive, and it's a win-win scenario, because even if we don't succeed in getting some bone from the establishment in this fight, we'll at least know who we should be targeting. And this is going to be displayed and emboldened based on the premise that it's going to be taken to an actual vote, and there will be a national debate on this, and it will be in the media for really the first time, and you will have people in front of the nation talking about the need for Medicare for all. So I think that it's a very, very simple thing for the squad and for people like Mark Pocan and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley and all of them to do. And there's really not a lot to lose.
Well, I mean, I agree with the point. I definitely agree with the point that it would continue and further and heighten the national debate around this issue, because it would be in the media. Obviously, it would be a big thing. And that's why, I mean, even though I disagree with the general tactic, I support the rallies you're having in Washington, D.C., because I think putting pressure on people is really important. I think increasing the national debate around these issues is really important. And that's part of the grassroots work you need to do. I mean, I despise them intensely, but you have to tip your hat in a political sense to the Tea Party and what they were able to achieve. They essentially took over one of the 2 major parties in America and achieved virtually everything they wanted. I mean, the huge tax cuts for the billionaires during a heightened, disgustingly heightened wealth inequalities and all the rest of it. They achieved what they wanted to do. They had a plan and they set out and they did it. And part of that is things like the protests you're going to be having in Washington in the next few days. So I mean, genuinely good luck to that.
Thank you.
I disagree. Like I say, I disagree with the tactic, but I don't disagree with the overall the outcome that you want. And I sincerely hope that America's able to achieve that in the next. Well, hopefully tomorrow, but I mean, more likely in the next 10 years, whatever, you know. Any final thoughts before you go? Because we've been going about an hour now, so I think that's, and like you said, we don't want to go round and round in circles, because that's, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess just everyone who's tuning in or watching this after the fact, keep fighting. I don't know where your audience primarily lives, but if you do have a lot of American viewers,
about half my audience is American. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who are Americans, I think one of the strongest arguments in my eyes is, if this was going to be a bad thing for progressives or for Medicare for all, then Nancy Pelosi and the political elite would have already done this. So. If you are interested in pushing for Medicare for all, if you're interested in getting involved on the ground rather than just more Twitter fights and senseless bickering online, then be sure to show up. January 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we are going to be meeting for hopefully massive protests outside the halls of Congress and outside the office buildings of Nancy Pelosi and AOC. And it's going to be at Spirit of Justice Park. If you just follow me on Twitter or whatever, YouTube, you'll see all my updates.
Yeah, Jackson's YouTube and Twitter are below. Go and give him a follow. He does really good work. Even if, like you say, we have a tactical disagreement, I think he's a good dude. So go and check him out below for updates and stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation. Yeah. And like I said, I definitely think there can be strategic disagreements. If any of you are interested in tuning into a slightly different conversation tonight, I'm going to be having on Nick Brana of the People's Party, which is kind of an outsider strategy and approach to this issue.
Yeah.
And it should be interesting.
Cool. Stay safe in DC, because there's going to be some crazy MAGA peeps who turn up, I'm sure. So and good luck with the overall push for healthcare in America. It's much needed. Thank you, Jackson, and maybe we'll speak another time, man. Take care.
Yeah, I'm down. Thanks for having me on.
Cool, man. Bye.
Bye.
And there we go. I thought that was quite a productive conversation with everyone. Sorry I didn't interact with the chat a great deal. I was trying to focus on the conversation, but I did check in every now and then. Hello to everyone on Twitch as well. I'm going to kick you over to who's broadcasting. The Surfs are broadcasting, so you can go and check out the Surfs and see what's going on there. And to everyone else, thank you for listening and watching. Happy New Year to everyone. If you're in an incorrect time zone and you're already in 2021, good for you. And indeed, if you're watching this in the future. Until I see you next time, Happy New Year and all that shit. No pass around.